You know what used to drive me crazy? I'd spend half my summer evenings dragging a hose around the garden, running the sprinkler for an hour, watching my water bill climb, and my tomatoes would still wilt by 2 in the afternoon. I was doing everything the gardening books told me to do. Water regularly, keep the soil moist, don't let things dry out. And still, my plants looked stressed half the time. Then I visited an Amish homestead outside of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in the middle of July. It hadn't rained in almost 2 weeks, and their garden looked better than mine on its best day. Deep green leaves, no wilting, soil that was dark and cool to the touch. Not a hose in sight, not a sprinkler, not a single foot of drip line. I asked how they kept everything so well watered, and the answer honestly embarrassed me, because it was simpler than anything I'd ever tried, and it worked better than everything I'd been doing for 30 years. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how the Amish water their gardens without hoses or sprinklers, and how you can use the same methods to cut your water usage dramatically while growing healthier plants. And stick around to the end because I'll share a technique they use with their watering cans that changed how I think about when and where water actually needs to go. I'll be honest, for most of my gardening life, I treated water like it was unlimited. Turn on the hose, let the sprinkler run, soak everything from above, and move on. It worked well enough. But when I started paying attention to how Amish families in Lancaster County and Holmes County, Ohio manage water without any pressurized system at all, I realized I'd been wasting an enormous amount of water and actually making my plants weaker in the process. What I'm about to share isn't about giving up your hose if you have one. It's about understanding why simpler methods often produce better results and how adding even 1 or 2 of these approaches to what you're already doing can make a noticeable difference this season. Here's what makes the Amish approach to water so different from what most of us do. They don't have the option of turning on a spigot. There's no municipal water line running to the garden, no electric pump powering a sprinkler system. They work with what nature provides, rainfall, gravity, and soil that's been built over years to hold moisture on its own. And because water is something they have to collect, carry, and conserve, they've developed a whole system around making every drop count. This isn't a philosophy they read about in a sustainability magazine. It's how their families have gardened for generations because they had no other choice. And here's what I find fascinating. The methods they developed out of pure necessity turn out to be better for the plants than what most of us do with unlimited water access. When you water less frequently, but more intentionally, roots grow deeper. When you mulch heavily, soil stays cool and moist for days instead of hours. When you design your garden to capture rain instead of letting it run off, you're working with nature instead of fighting it. University extension research has confirmed what the Amish figured out through observation. Overhead, sprinklers lose up to 50% of their water to evaporation and runoff. Targeted root zone watering wastes almost nothing. And 4 to 6 inches of organic mulch can reduce your garden's water needs by as much as 70%. Let me show you exactly how they put this together. The first thing the Amish do that most of us never think about is designing the garden layout itself to work with water. Before a single seed goes in the ground, they pay attention to how rain moves across the property. Where does water naturally collect after a storm? Where does it run off? Which direction does the land slope, even slightly? In a typical Amish kitchen garden, the beds are oriented and graded so that rainfall flows toward the plants rather than away from them. If the land has even a gentle slope, they'll run their beds along the contour, perpendicular to the direction water flows. This creates a series of small natural terraces that catch rainfall and hold it in the root zone instead of letting it sheet off downhill. Here's how to apply this in your own garden. Walk your property during or right after a rain and watch where water moves. You'll notice patterns you've probably ignored for years. Puddles form in certain spots. Water runs along certain paths. Now, position your beds to intercept that flow. If your garden slopes even slightly, orient your beds across the slope, not up and down it. If you have a low spot where water naturally collects, that's where your thirstiest crop should go. Tomatoes, squash, and cucumbers love those spots. If you have a higher, drier area, that's where your herbs and root crops will do just fine with less moisture. For flat ground, you can create shallow berms, just 2 to 3 inches high along the downhill edge of each bed. These act like tiny dams that keep rainfall in the bed long enough to soak in rather than running off into your pathways. It's such a simple adjustment, but I've watched it turn beds that used to dry out in a day into beds that hold moisture for 3 to 4 days after a good rain. In zones 5 through 7, where rainfall during the growing season typically ranges from 3 to 4 inches per month, this kind of passive water capture can cut your supplemental watering in half. The second method is one you've probably heard of, but the Amish take it further than most people realize. Rain barrels. Now, before you picture a single barrel sitting under a downspout, let me describe what I saw at an Amish homestead in Holmes County. They had 6 55-gallon barrels connected in series along the barn roof, linked together with short overflow pipes, so that when the first barrel filled, water flowed into the second, then the third, and so on. That's 330 gallons of storage from one roofline. And here's the key. The barrels sat on a platform about 3 feet off the ground, so gravity did all the work. A simple valve at the bottom of the last barrel connected to a length of garden hose that ran right to the edge of the garden beds. No pump needed, just gravity. Here's the math that makes this practical. 1 inch of rainfall on 1,000 square feet of roof produces roughly 600 gallons of water. Most barns, garages, and even garden sheds have enough roof area to collect a surprising amount. A typical home with a modest garage roof of around 500 square feet will collect about 300 gallons from a single half-inch rain event. That's enough to hand water a quarter-acre garden for several days. To set this up, place your barrels on a sturdy platform of cinder blocks or a wooden frame, at least 2 to 3 feet above the ground level of your garden. The higher the barrels, the more water pressure you get from gravity. Connect them in series with short overflow pipes near the top of each barrel so water cascades from one to the next. Screen the inlet to keep debris and mosquitoes out, and install a simple spigot valve at the bottom of the last barrel in the series. One important note: check your local regulations before collecting rainwater. Most areas in the eastern United States have no restrictions, but a few western states have specific rules about rainwater harvesting. A quick check with your county extension office will clear that up. The third step is the one that made the single biggest difference in my own garden, and it's the simplest of all: mulch. But not the thin decorative layer most of us put down. The Amish mulch, heavy. I'm talking 4 to 6 inches of straw or hay spread across every bed, around every plant, covering every square inch of exposed soil. When I first saw an Amish garden in midsummer, I could barely see the soil at all. It looked like the plants were growing out of a thick golden blanket. And when I pushed the straw aside and touched the ground underneath, the soil was cool and damp even though it hadn't rained in over a week. Here's why this works so well. Bare soil in direct sunlight can reach surface temperatures of 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit on a hot summer day. At that temperature, water evaporates almost as fast as you can apply it, but under 4 to 6 inches of straw mulch, soil temperature stays 20 to 30 degrees cooler. That alone cuts evaporation dramatically. On top of that, the mulch physically blocks the sun from hitting the soil surface, which means moisture stays in the root zone where your plants can actually use it instead of disappearing into the air. Here's exactly how to do it the way the Amish do. After your transplants are established and about 6 inches tall, or after your direct-seeded crops have their first set of true leaves, spread straw or hay around and between your plants in a thick layer 4 to 6 inches deep. Pull it right up to the stems, but don't pack it against them. Leave about an inch of clearance around each stem to prevent moisture from sitting directly against the plant and inviting rot. For seeded rows that haven't emerged yet, wait until the seedlings are up and visible before mulching around them. Now, straw is better than hay for this purpose because hay often contains weed seeds. If you can get clean wheat straw or oat straw, that's ideal. Some Amish families use spoiled hay that's no longer good for animal feed, and they accept the trade-off of a few extra weeds because the moisture retention benefits are so significant. In my experience, 4 inches of clean straw mulch extends the time between waterings from every day or two to every 4 to 5 days, even in the heat of July. That's not a small difference. That's cutting your watering workload by more than half. If you're finding value in learning how the Amish manage water without any modern irrigation, take a second to subscribe. I've been studying these off-grid methods closely, and there's a lot more practical wisdom to share. Now, let's keep going, because the next step addresses exactly how the Amish deliver water when rain alone isn't enough. When rain barrels run low and there hasn't been a good storm in a while, the Amish still need to water. But they don't drag out a hose and spray everything from above. They carry watering cans directly to each plant and pour water right at the base, right at the root zone, slowly enough that it soaks straight down instead of pooling on the surface and running off. This sounds old-fashioned, and it is. But here's why it works better than what most of us do. When you run a sprinkler, water lands on leaves, on pathways, on mulch surfaces, and on bare ground where no roots exist. Studies from university extension programs estimate that overhead watering wastes 30 to 50% of the water you apply. It either evaporates before reaching the roots or lands where no plant can use it. When you pour water directly at the base of a plant, virtually 100% of it goes into the root zone. Nothing is wasted. There's a second benefit most people don't think about. Overhead watering wets the foliage, which creates the perfect environment for fungal diseases like blight, powdery mildew, and leaf spot. Amish gardeners rarely deal with these problems, and a big reason is that their leaves stay dry. Water goes on the soil, not the plant. Here's how to apply this. Use a watering can or a low-pressure, gravity-fed line from your rain barrel and deliver water slowly at the base of each plant. Water deeply, about 1 inch per session, which means the soil should be moist, down to about 6 inches. You can check this by pushing your finger into the soil after watering. If it's damp at 2 inches but dry below that, you haven't watered enough. If it's moist down to 6 inches, you're right where you want to be. In zones 5 through 7 during the heat of summer, deeply watered and well-mulched beds typically need attention only every 4 to 5 days. Compare that to daily sprinkler use, and you'll see why the Amish approach uses a fraction of the water while delivering better results. The last piece of the Amish water system isn't really about water at all, it's about soil. Amish families have been adding compost, aged manure, and organic matter to their garden beds for generations. Over time, this builds soil that acts like a sponge. Healthy soil with high organic content can hold up to 20 times its weight in water. Compacted, depleted soil with low organic matter lets water run right through or sheet off the surface. Here's the practical difference. Sandy soil with low organic matter might hold moisture for a day after watering. That same soil with 2 to 3 years of compost worked in can hold moisture for 3 to 4 days. Clay soil with good organic content holds even longer. The Amish don't think of compost as a fertilizer. They think of it as a water system. Every wheelbarrow of compost worked into the bed is another day you don't have to water. Start by adding 2 to 3 inches of finished compost to the top of your beds each spring and each fall. Don't till it in aggressively. Let the worms and soil biology pull it down naturally. Within 2 to 3 seasons, you'll notice your soil is darker, holds together in a loose crumb when you squeeze it, and stays moist, noticeably longer between waterings. Let me share some patterns I've noticed in how most of us water compared to the Amish approach. The first is watering too often and too shallow. We give the garden a light sprinkle every day, which trains roots to stay near the surface where they're vulnerable to heat and drought. The Amish water deeply and less often, which pushes roots down where moisture is stable. The second is relying entirely on municipal water. The Amish collect every drop of rain that falls on their roofs. Even 1 or 2 rain barrels can supplement your watering significantly and lower your water bill. The third is leaving soil bare and exposed. Without mulch, you're losing moisture to evaporation every hour of every sunny day. 4 to 6 inches of straw changes that equation completely. The fourth is ignoring how water moves across your property. A simple adjustment to bed orientation or a small berm can capture rainfall you're currently losing to runoff. Now here's something I learned from watching an Amish neighbor that I haven't seen in any gardening book. She watered her garden exclusively between 5 and 6 in the morning before the sun hit the beds. But what caught my attention was what she did with the last half can. She poured it slowly along the outside edges of each bed, right where the mulch met the pathway. When I asked why, she said the edges dry out. First, because they're exposed on one side. By giving the boarders a small drink each morning, she kept the moisture level even across the entire bed instead of having dry edges and a wet center. I started doing this about 3 years ago, and it eliminated the stunted plants I always used to get along the edges of my beds. Such a small thing, but it made every plant in the bed perform evenly. That's the kind of detail you pick up from people who've been doing this their whole lives without any technology to fall back on. That's what I've learned from watching how Amish families keep their gardens thriving without a single hose, sprinkler, or irrigation timer. Capture your rain, mulch like you mean it, water at the root, not from above, and build soil that does half the work for you. These aren't fancy techniques. They're common sense refined over generations by families who had to make every drop of water count. If any of this changes how you think about watering your garden, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what you're going to try first or share what's already working for you. Hit subscribe if you want more of these practical lessons from traditional growers who figured out what works long before the rest of us caught on. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.